We'll call to order the special meeting of the Eastpointe City Council and the City Planning Commission. It's Tuesday, May 28th at 7 p.m. and we're in the City Council chambers of the Eastpointe City Hall. Please call the roll.
Councilmember DeMonico?
Here.
Councilmember Kleinfeld?
Here.
Councilmember Lucido?
Here.
Mayor Paisley?
Here. And then, where is Sheila to call the roll?
Mr. Broll will be acting as secretary tonight in
Okay,
Sheila's
Mr. Broll.
absence.
All right. Mr. Palazzolo.
Here.
Mr. Lalonde.
Here.
Ms. Ulinski is not here. Mr. Jakubiec.
Here.
DeHaan. Mr. DeHaan.
Yes.
Broll is here. Chairman Lubeck.
Here.
So we need an approval of the agenda. We'll start with council. If someone would like to make approval of the agenda or any additions,
Sure. I'll motion to approve the agenda.
Support.
who will support it? Please call that roll.
Yep.
It doesn't matter.
Councilmember DeMonico?
Yes.
Councilmember Lucido?
Yes.
Councilmember Kleinfeld?
Yes.
Mayor Paisley?
Yes. I will move on to Mr. Broll.
Mr. Palazzolo.
Yes.
Mr. Lalonde.
Yes.
Mr. Jakubiec.
Yes.
Mr. DeHaan.
Yes.
Broll, yes. Chairman Lubeck.
Yes.
We'll move on to the hearing of the public, and I may remind you that please state your name and for this purpose, what city you're from, and then you're allowed for 3 minutes, please, and use the microphone there. Anyone wish to speak? Mr. Accavetti.
Good evening, Mayor Pixley. Good evening, Chairman Lubeck, members of the City Council and the Planning Commission. My name is Frank Accavetti. I'm a resident of the City of Eastpointe. I'm joined tonight with my client, Emerald Growth Partners, who has retail establishments known as Pleasantries. I have Daniel Crittenden, the CFO, and I have Travis Harrison, the Director of Retail for Emerald Growth Partners. Gentlemen, we have 3 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Frank. Council people and Planning Commission, thank you for your time. Again, my name is Travis Harrison. I represent the operational side of Emerald Growth Partners and Pleasantries Retail. And I wanted to just take a brief moment. I prepared a short deck for you to have a look at and familiarize yourself with our brand. I've met with and seen and spoke with many of you here over the past several months. And obviously, really wanted to take the few minutes here to speak to a property.
I'll hide behind the sign.
Sure. A property that we purchased in hopes of getting approval here in Eastpointe. I spent the last 15 years in retail. I was with Ralph Lauren in New York City and Los Angeles for 8 of those years, running roughly 27 businesses. I then met my wife, who drug me back here to Detroit, where I live, and met Dan and partnered up after 3.5 years at Shinola, where I built out roughly 27 businesses. So I've spent, as I said, 15 years in retail, really driving operational proficiencies, whether that be security, whether that be job creation, HR, you name it. I've had the experience within that sector. And really, to Frank's point, hope to bring the retail proficiency to Pleasantries. We have a location here at, Dan, at 19,000 East 9 Mile there at 94. This is a property that we hope to beautify in the process of getting approval and really turn it into a state-of-the-art medical cannabis company. We hope to employ roughly 45 individuals locally, as well as security people locally, as well as provide an opportunity for not only the residents of Eastpointe, but those residents from other municipalities that might have opted out nearby to come and shop with us in our location, and then also shop in the Eastpointe area. So hopefully you'll have a moment to look at the deck that I provided, and then be able to review the building that we have set aside, again, at 19,000 East 9 Mile and 94. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
Does anyone else wish to be heard? Please.
Frank did a wonderful job. My name is Chris Aiello. I'm an attorney on Mound Road. I used to be a male model for Ralph Lauren. And we used to employ 47 people at our store. But all kidding aside, this is Aaron Cole. He hopes to do business in Eastpointe. I'm going to let him explain who he is and what he does. He's got a purchase agreement on a building on 8 Mile and Kelly. And with all due, Mr. Aaron Cole.
Hi, thanks for your time. Our company is Proper Company, and we are cultivators, processors, and we have provisionary centers, all in the state of Michigan. We hope to do business in Eastpointe, not only with those 3 licenses, but we want to be involved in the community and do a lot of good stuff. Hopefully, if you guys choose us, that store that he mentioned on 8 Mile and Kelly will be a full renovation, kind of revitalizing it. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And we'll be supplementing the record in the future with renderings also like everybody else has. And then I have one other client that wants to do business on 10 Mile and Gratiot in the Dimitris there. And we'll be rolling out an application. His name is Joe Aiello, and somehow he's related to me. And so we'll be rolling out a rendering there and showing you what the type of business we can do there on the retail end of it to supplement all the other stores that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
How's everybody tonight? I'm here this evening to discuss the property that Holistic Industries and myself have vetted for state licensing provisioning center. We have provisioning centers in heavily regulated markets such as Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Washington, D.C., California, as well as my Ann Arbor location. In every project, we bring a tremendous depth of knowledge and expertise along with a set of proven security, design, and business operation procedures. Our Eastpointe location is at 20958 Gratiot Avenue. Currently, half the building is operating as Waterfalls Bar, and the other half is the old Don's Chuck Wagon, long empty and blighted. While I would have liked to use my family's auto repair shop, Ken South Park Service, at 22785 Gratiot, we realized that it might not be ideal for the city. We were careful in considering potential sites. The Waterfalls location fits the area and the development goals of Eastpointe. When the redevelopment is complete, it will also help raise the profile of the surrounding businesses along that stretch of Gratiot. In its current state as Waterfalls Bar, patrons use intoxicants late into the evening and drive home through our city. Our use will rehabilitate the property into a modern retail operation with no on-site consumption. The site is well buffered from housing and schools and has access to ample off-street parking, so residents will not be disturbed by traffic, noise, smell, or any other potential nuisances. Our provisioning centers offer an uncommon standard of professional and personalized care. We create spaces that welcome, engage, and inspire loyalty among patients and pride within the community. Our medical marijuana facilities make lives better and better neighborhoods. Our spaces are beautiful and safe locations for responsible adults to obtain the highest quality medicine with security standards exceeding any state or local requirements that I have seen. Additionally, we provide ongoing support for the communities we serve. Last year, we donated over $100,000 to local causes, including key medical research on the impact of medical marijuana on opioid overdoses and mortality rate. We also participate and sponsor local community events, support local initiatives and projects, and always look to hire locally for staffing and security. As a longtime resident of Eastpointe, I'm excited to be able to help my own community in a similar fashion. We have discussed ideas about where a portion of our revenue could be used, such as adopting and aiding parks, the new Frisbee golf course, resident education, and possibly the new art commission. Eastpointe is where I grew up, and my family lives and works here still to this day. I have deep care for the community, state licensed cannabis experience, and now the financial resources to invest in the revitalization of my hometown. Thank you.
Thank you. And for the record, sir, could you state your name?
My name's Eric Moyer.
Say it louder and clear.
Eric Moyer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Mr. Chairman. My name is Shelley Edgerton. I'm from Lansing. I'm here speaking on behalf of the interests of Holistic Industries. I am also, you might recognize my name, the former director for the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. The department was charged with putting together this program. So if you want to vent tonight, I guess you can vent at me. But anyways, I know you're grappling with a lot of concepts in terms of this ordinance, and Holistic thought that it might be of benefit for me to speak out on a couple of topics, especially when it comes to the zones, your buffering, your setbacks, what might be the key. I know a lot of communities have grappled with this. Obviously, the state didn't step into it and set a time, place, and manner in terms of those issues. And so what we have looked at a number of communities, and you're probably similarly faced with this, is how do you do setbacks? What's the appropriate setback for your community? Obviously, there's a number of people here that want to support the economic development for Eastpointe. So I think it's encouraging to see the kind of work and the kind of quality of people that want to enter into Eastpointe. With that, I mean, obviously the standard, and probably McKenna is hopefully here and represented, talks about the schools. 1,000 feet is the normal average for schools. But what we have seen in our research is that a lot of communities have varied that greatly, 250, 500, 750, depending on where they want to place a location. And they've worked with a lot of the industry to get those setbacks appropriately. And actually, in terms of measurement, they've either used the LCC, liquor rule. A lot of communities use that rule as a standard measurement. Some of them use, as the crows fly, as they like to say, or if it's property line to property line. Those tools are obviously available under the Zoning Act, and so that would be appropriate. The other one thing I want to bring up, and if you get to the ordinance level, in something that we've seen communities struggle with a lot, is the pre-qualification or the application process itself. A lot of communities jumped into this industry well before the state had rules, and I think are seeing some of the repercussions of that early entry because they had to do a lot of the legwork to qualify candidates. What you're starting to see now is a lot of municipalities say, come to us, but you've got to be pre-qualified for the state. I can tell you right now, the state does a rigorous job in terms of background checks. I mean, not only the criminal, but the financial, as well as just the kind of the public record search that goes about it. And so, spending your resources on that is kind of a duplication of effort. So if you go forward with the ordinances, one of the things I would suggest is that you move forward and have people be pre-qualified as a step one from the state. And that at least gives you a leg up in making those next determinations, whether it's lottery or points or, geographical overlay in terms of how people get set up. But there's lots of opportunity in this industry to be able to craft something that fits a community. And the state recognizes that. And so that's really the main 2 points that I wanted to encourage you to consider tonight when you're looking at these ordinances.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else wish to speak? Anyone else? No one? With that, the first hearing in the public is closed. So let's move on, and we'll have Jeff Lubeck, who's the chairman of the Planning Commission, update the council on what's going on, what you've done with the Planning Commission in the since we first sent it to you.
I'm going to defer that to Ms. Hall, our planning consultant.
Ms. Hall?
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. At the May 2nd Planning Commission meeting, the commission continued their discussion on medical marijuana facilities. It was previously their understanding that council was not interested in grower facilities, so they kind of moved quickly on that and said no grower facilities within Eastpointe, but then moved the discussion onto provisioning centers, dispensaries. And the goal of the Planning Commission was to identify potential zoning districts that would be most ideal for such facilities, and that was the B3, the General Commercial District. So the map that's in front of you this evening shows areas of the B3 district that were considered appropriate. This had eliminated sections of 9 Mile and also Kelly Road, as those were found to be more neighborhood serving, and also master planned as more local pedestrian areas. and not regional destinations where you would want to incur additional traffic volumes. So knowing those sections of the B3 general district, the commission looked at various separation distances and buffers to residential, but also to parks and schools. And the motion at the May 2nd meeting, the recommendation was for a 100-foot buffer from all residential districts, which is shown on the map in front of you, with also a 1,000-foot separation between like medical facilities. So that would be the darker radius that's shown on the map. And the commission also recommended a maximum of 3 dispensary facilities with increased setbacks for churches, schools, daycares, parks, etc. There is currently provisions in the zoning ordinance for 100-foot and 300-foot setbacks from residential, so there's precedent for both. With a 300-foot setback from residential, there are many more less spaces available. It's much more restrictive. So this would provide some additional opportunities for such facilities. And that was the recommendation from earlier in May, and then the commission also made a recommendation to council to consider a prohibitive ordinance on adult use recreation marijuana facilities at this time until the state issues their criteria later this summer and see how other communities are handling those applications and what those effects are. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Council, questions?
I have one. Didn't they discuss, did they ever discuss transportation facilities, testing facilities? Do you remember?
The other 3 facilities that are allowed under medical marijuana have not been discussed in detail. They kind of moved past the growers and then focused on the dispensaries at this point.
Okay.
If I can add, actually, our thought on the growing facilities is there are no real practical locations for that in Eastpointe. So that was kind of an easy one to discuss. If you really don't have a practical location to put it, why bother having a prolonged discussion on it?
No, I agree.
What about processing, transport, or testing then?
Again, as Ms. Haw just said, we haven't even begun to look at those.
Okay.
We looked at the growing operation, realizing that was going to be easy to eliminate, and then decided we were going to tackle provisioning centers. So we haven't, I couldn't even tell you the progress that we've made in terms of provisioning centers, because I don't quite know how to weigh that, because it seems like we're trying to hit a moving target.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Let's go back to provisioning centers. I know you guys recommended a 100-foot buffer between, from residential, 1,000-foot buffer between like facilities. Let's discuss the buffer from churches and schools, maybe, start there. Kind of get an idea of where you guys are at when it comes to that.
I believe it was 1,000-foot separation as well from schools, parks, daycare centers. Although, if I'm not mistaken, Laura, for liquor license control is 500 feet. And is up to the municipality, as it was earlier stated.
Is there a reason not to match the liquor code for zoning of the dispensaries?
Well, I think it just comes down to concentration of the facilities and whether or not they would be treated the same as other adult use regulations or other facilities. I think, Attorney Albright, you've drafted a couple different ordinances from model communities that were identified by council and the mayor. I think those separation standards in there were
500.
They were 500, yeah. There's two different model ordinances that have been drafted. They've been circulated. I believe council has received a copy of those as well. And they include all of the sections that we believe would be appropriate, just leaving, of course, blank what types of centers or licenses would be permitted in the number and the zoning districts where they would be located. So that is what the Planning Commission over the last couple of meetings has been going over. And that's what they have come up with as far as a partial recommendation on recommending 3 provisioning centers, and then with the distance requirements that Ms. Hall discussed.
So you would still have to have residential approval if you were within that 100-foot, correct? I'm just thinking, looking at the parking lot on 9 Mile Road, east of Kelly, and the red space that's there. That's when we've tried to put previous buildings in there. There's a fair amount of residential opposition to putting anything closer to that fence. So I'm wondering about that, because it almost looks like it's at the bare back of the fence, that one location.
Yeah, I'm not aware. So do you know the distance?
I don't know the exact distance there, but one of the things that the Planning Commission did express interest in was that any medical marijuana facility would be considered a special land use. And as a special land use, then that would allow notification of the public in the newspaper, but also for residents or business owners within 300 feet of the property. So that would give them notification and an opportunity to make comment on some of the externalities that maybe would enhance their quality of life.
So just looking at some of the people that came forward to speak tonight, I'm looking at some of the locations that were mentioned. 9 Mile Road and the freeway, essentially, where Mr. Accavetti proposed the pleasant trees. Is that a yes at that location? And I just see a thin red line.
The thin red would represent the portion of the parcel that could be developed for the building itself.
Okay. And then on 10 Mile and Gratiot.
Wait, can we back up a second before we, on that, look, what do you mean, yeah, what did you mean by that last, like the building? Is that not the whole?
So it's not the whole
lot?
parcel, it would only be along the curb, basically.
Yes, it's not the whole parcel.
Okay.
Just a part of a parcel?
Well, that's what the buffer, this map is showing what the buffer leaves. Anything in red is a portion of the parcel that is left in the B3 district.
And that's due to the 100 feet residential buffer?
Correct.
I'm so sorry. One quick question for planning. Did you guys discuss whether or not they had to be freestanding buildings or if they could be in a strip? I thought we had a discussion, and I don't remember exactly what that.
To my memory, no, we haven't. And actually, I see that Mr. Rohib is here tonight, and we've had no input at all in terms of what law enforcement would like to see or what concerns they have.
So I guess that means that we'd like to hear from you.
Well, we're talking about a 100-foot buffer. I guess you have to ask yourself, if you're a resident here, I mean, is 100 feet enough? I mean, if you put yourself in, it's not much, and then what about the parking situation? I'm concerned about parking. Do we have the resources for this? Will it increase crime? These are things that have to be answered, and nobody can answer them right now because this is all new. And then I wonder why many cities are opting out of this. And it concerns me as a law enforcement officer. I mean, I'm not against medical marijuana. Certainly if it helps people, that's great. I just wish Eastpointe had an industrial area, but unfortunately we don't. Most of it's made up of strip malls, and from driving around the city, especially like lunchtime, driving through the strip malls here, there's not much parking left in a lot of these strip malls. So I'm very concerned about the parking situation and what impact that would have on everything. So,
may I ask a question?
Sure.
Do you think with time, after communities that have opted in to whatever it is, and after a certain amount of study, that you, as the police chief, would feel more comfortable at least having an example of various communities and what they're doing as to how to handle this?
Oh, absolutely, because you always want feedback, what's going right, what's going wrong, you can make the proper adjustments. But right now, it's all new, and you just hate to jump in first. You know, let's just, I guess you say, pump the brakes a little bit, let's see what's happening out there, and let's get some feedback, hopefully it's positive feedback, and then you can select areas and how many. I mean, the question is how many facilities do we want? Where do we want them located? But 100 feet, I mean, as a resident here, I wouldn't want that 100 feet from my home.
What's the present, right, for liquor stores, it's 50 feet from residential?
No, I believe it's 500.
500? No, from residential, 500 for liquor stores. It can't, it's not 500.
Mr. Albert,
Let me check.
on those ordinances, the sample ordinances, what was their limitation on proximity to residential?
I thought it was 500 feet.
I thought it was 500, 500 on one, and I know there was another one that was 1,000.
I thought it was 500. But again, that can certainly be adjusted by the particular community.
So if we were to adjust it to 500 feet, there's only a few properties that would allow for that, correct? Maybe the waterfall?
There might be one property with 500 feet.
Waterfalls is, I believe, about 250 feet from residential.
All right, well, let's.
Actually, if Director Rohib could,
Were you done?
if he's willing to give us some input, there was a question asked on whether or not you felt a provisioning center should be freestanding. I don't know if you have an opinion on that right now.
I don't
or
have
not.
an opinion at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the Director of Public Safety?
Yes. How do you honestly feel about this? Give me, let's not sugarcoat it, let's not be a good city employee. How do you, as a Michigan
You're
resident-
asking a former narcotics officer for 12 years. It's very difficult. It's like, it's almost being hypocritical. However, and here's and the reason I'm saying this is, I have never seen a legit grow operation yet. You can grow 12 plants in your house, up to 72 plants. Of all the raids that I've been involved in, I have never once seen a legitimate grow operation. It's all about the dollars. That's what it's about. You know, and marijuana, it has a dollar value. When people find out that you're growing marijuana, guess what? I mean, could that impact crime? It could. But again, I'm not against medical marijuana. If it helps people, great. The question is, if we allow these businesses to come in town, how many are we going to allow to come in? Where do you stop? You know, and not where, but how many, where, is there enough, again, is there ample parking? That's what I'm concerned about. Can we handle it? I mean, we go from call to call to call. Can we handle all this extra business here? I don't know. I don't know yet. It's just too soon. I mean, I don't have everything in front of me. That's why it's nice to look at other communities, see what they're doing right and wrong, and then you can evaluate it and come up with some type of strategic plan. But as I stated earlier, 100 feet from a residential area, I have an issue with that. I do, and I'm sure if somebody bought a house here, you're not going to want your home 100 feet from one of these facilities. I mean, honestly, can you honestly say yes? That doesn't bother me. And I don't think anybody can. So that's my honest opinion.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Albright, what would you like to add?
Well, I think that this is the opportunity for the council to give direction, because the planning commission, I believe, is looking for some guidance as to what the council exactly is looking for. They've made progress with regard to identifying which, as residents as well, which different types of licenses they believe are a good fit for the city, and they've concluded that 3 provisioning centers located in the city is appropriate at this time. But that hasn't been in the form of a formal recommendation yet. Certainly, the Public Safety Director's opinion should be included in that, and perhaps the city wants to start out with one location and see how it goes.
So those 3 centers, though, were within utilizing the 100 feet from residential.
That was based on the 100 feet map that Ms. Hoff prepared, yes.
And the Director of Public Safety is recommending that that's too little of space.
He's expressed concerns about that, yes.
So let's go back to Laura. If you were to use 300 feet, how many of these locations that you have on this map would be eliminated, or 500 feet?
There are a number of locations that are eliminated when you apply the 300-foot buffer. I think the map that was presented to the Planning Commission showed approximately 7 spaces, 7 different areas, but that is to say that there are really only those few locations, and that if those were not, ideal locations or available sites, then it would render it, impossible to construct a facility. The other option would be to have the 300 or to have a 200-foot and then offer a variance to that requirement. That would, require an additional public hearing and a opportunity for residents and property owners within 300 feet to come and comment.
So,
Go on, Michael.
if I may, Mr. Albright, I think you mentioned it might be good to get a sense of where council is. I believe the consensus on council was grow operations, no, we just don't have the space for that. Provisioning, I know that at least in the past, the majority of council said we would like to see some provisioning centers entered or allowed. I would agree that 3 seems like an appropriate number.
I think 3 is an appropriate number also.
Sure.
I would like to see no more than 3, but I'm really concerned about the buffer zone. And looking at this map and the locations that we have, I know that probably 3 or 4 of these locations of the 7 are inappropriate right now. The location at Kelly and 10 Mile Road is Donna's, and it's a parking lot there
Kelly
that's
Middle
fully
School.
utilized by the dialysis center. The one on 9 Mile Road, the red block there at 9 and Kelly, is actually right next to the Secretary of State building, so I'm not quite sure that that would be a good combination. So the only one that I can really see is the one at, the one that has a plus there is part of Michigan First Credit Union, and they have they have decided long ago that that property would not be utilized for anything, and they kept the ownership of that property, and they demolished their former building just to keep that as a green space. So then the other places that you're looking at are Genesis, and that's their front parking lot, their service center, which they've filled with cars. So I don't think that's gonna be available on either side, the east or the west side of Gratiot at Topher.
I got a quick question. So just so I understand the map properly, the red locations are 100 feet or more from residential, and then the circles with the, little plus sign in the middle are examples of some of those properties, right? So it wouldn't necessarily have to be those, it could be any of the red properties?
Yes, correct. The plus signs and the radiuses, they're purely illustrative to show that if a location did go up at one of the plus signs, the type of distance you would be required to have another facility. So none of these this is not speculative of where they might go. They could go within the red areas, provided there's
It could be adjusted.
Correct. Provided there's enough space for the building footprint that's desired. So in the case of the 9 Mile and closer to 94, if this is not sufficient space for the building footprint, then they may have to seek a variance for the remaining 60 feet of their building or 50 feet, whatever that building envelope may be.
So I got a question for planning. I know you guys discussed this a lot, and I know you made the recommendation to do a special land use. But I wonder if it would be better, instead of doing a special land use, doing a 300-foot buffer from residential and then allowing for a variance. And then everyone's gonna have coming to planning anyways for the variance probably because there wasn't hardly any spaces, I remember, on Ms. Hollis' map with the 300-foot. Was very limited to where you would be able to.
Well, planning doesn't grant variances, the zoning board of
That's
appeals
right,
does.
zoning.
So the benefit of having the planning commission review under special land use is that, let's say, you know, the neighbors, the adjacent neighbors come out and say, oh, we'd really like to see more screening, then the planning commission has the ability to say, okay, well, we need to see some more landscaping, or maybe they want, you know, a 7-foot wall instead. Whereas the ZBA, their responsibility is not to design the site, they can only act on the requested variance. So they could say, okay, this distance is okay, but we can't require more landscaping, or the dumpster to be located further away from the residence.
And it's a relatively high standard in order to obtain a variance through the zoning board of appeals. It has to be a hardship, and one of the specific, Michigan law is very clear that the hardship cannot be monetary.
Okay.
Nor can it be self-created. So if you know you don't have the 300-foot buffer, and you choose to buy that property and try to put that kind of facility there, you've just, by letter of the law, said you're not eligible for a variance.
Right, so yeah, then I would be definitely more for the 100-foot buffer, I believe. I mean, liquor stores is 50. I think 100 from residential would be appropriate, in my opinion.
And we also did at the last meeting discover something rather interesting, what the buffer distance is for bars. Bars and saloons.
What was the interesting thing?
We don't have a requirement for those in our zoning.
Does the state?
It's just liquor stores.
The state doesn't have a requirement?
Not for bars, for saloon, yeah. I don't know if we have any saloons in the city, but I know we have bars.
Well, you never know. We might be the first. So I'm interested in.
Well, I know plenty of bars in the city that clearly are not 100 feet from residential.
I'm just
I
saying.
don't even think some of them are 50 feet from residential.
Agreed.
I'm just saying we don't have any saloons. At the 8 Mile, on the west side of 8 Mile Road, that's already a multi-retail. So this goes back to the recommendation of, do you want to have something within multiple retail? Because if you were to use that space up at 10 Mile and Gratiot, there's no standalone buildings that are available, I believe. Who was it? Frank? You were the one that said something about 10 Mile Road. Did you want to put it in the drugstore, the former drugstore site, or? were you
It'll go into Dimitri's, or all tenants will be removed, therefore it'll be one single building. So,
It'll go into Dimitri's?
yes.
Oh, my God.
You can't get rid of Dimitri's.
Well, you can have, with your burger, you can have an entree. Or
What was
So
the
I guess that's one of the
argument?
things that we would need to put into any kind of an ordinance, is whether the council should allow for insertion within a building, a pre-existing building.
Well, I mean, that
What
was
was
my
the
question.
negative?
I guess my question was, like, should we do freestanding? Instead of being in a shopping
You're right.
strip. I mean, I like the idea of the freestanding better, because if people are going to that strip for other stores or whatever, freestanding, I think, would be.
Well, that's the other thing, to look at Stevens and Gratiot, that would be the new storage center that has space for 3 retails.
Correct,
And
right.
so that would.
But I mean, if they wanted to buy the whole strip, you know what I'm saying, and turn that whole thing, I mean, then it would be a freestanding building.
Yeah, I think I know we've talked about this before. I think it was mentioned at planning, the freestanding issue. The building at 10 Mile concerns me less because I think there's more space behind it than most of what our retail looks like. When I think of why freestanding is better, I think it's because if there's a long strip and there's a narrow alley behind it, it's hard to monitor if anyone gathers behind that facility or something. Like the one on 10 Mile, it's pretty out in the open. If you drive by, I think behind the building, it's easily visible. So I'm less worried about it.
Yeah,
Does that-
my concern isn't the behind as much as it is, like, I don't know, if like a video game store, like, do you want those the kids going in and out of a video game store, walking, that would be my concern. Or
Okay.
even like a dollar store, or a restaurant, or anything, that's where the freestanding
Well,
is.
the video store is right next to a massage parlor, so. And the kids go in and out now. I
Yeah.
mean, just-
You're absolutely right, Councilwoman Lucido. These businesses should be freestanding. The building will be easily secured. You have one entrance and/or two maybe at the most. We
Preferred fire code.
Hopefully. We do not need them anywhere near other businesses that would have children going past, people that have issues with their lungs, COPD. They don't need to inhale this stuff. I understand they're not smoking in the room and they're not smoking it out in the parking lot or anything like that, but let's face it, people do. I was
Right.
getting a cup of coffee today and it smelled like a Cheech and Chong movie coming out of the Buick in front of me, and it's wafting down. We do not need anything like that exposed to young children, potentially walking past a strip center. So I think a freestanding building makes more sense, easily secured. You can have 360 cameras around the whole thing. You don't have to worry about a little chunk of a building and potentially missing something. So, just my 2 cents.
The other concern being parking. If it's a freestanding building, they're responsible for all of the parking there as opposed to shared parking in a strip mall.
And they would be responsible for the behaviors in that parking lot as well. If there are any illicit behaviors, if there are people smoking in the parking lot, which is illegal, then the business owner then becomes responsible for that lot versus sharing it with another tenant, so.
Did you have any comment?
Everything you're talking about makes absolute sense. It's just easier to control if it was freestanding.
So I'm fine with.
And I mean, like the Kelly location that, you know, they showed us before, like I said, if they wanted to buy the building next door to that on top of it, and they had that whole strip, that would be, to me, that'd be okay, because then they have their own parking lot, and there's just more.
You're talking about 9 Mile and Kelly, or are you talking about 8?
It was 8
8
in Kelly.
Mile by Foot Locker?
It was 8 in Kelly. Someone just gave us a sheet earlier with a picture.
Foot Locker has 2 or 3 buildings in that location, right?
No, it wasn't it was on the opposite side of Foot Locker.
Is it Village
It
Inn?
was, you have a Mobile One Express, place here on Kelly Road,
Breadbasket down.
right at 8 Mile and Kelly, right across the street from Foot Locker. Then next to that is a, potential site, it looks like. So like I was saying, if they bought they purchased that whole thing, I think I'd be okay with that, but I don't know what's in this other part of the strip mall. offhand.
One of them is not the barbecue, but the Reuben sandwich place.
I think that's the place that they have marked, is the Reuben Sandwich Place.
Is that empty? I thought they were still,
To help understand what you're talking about, the brown building would be the provisioning center. The mobile one would be removed for parking lot, and the restaurant would be removed. So it would be just the brown building in and of itself.
Okay.
Could we actually get that?
What's that?
None of us on this side of the table have that.
this is the first time I've ever seen.
We just,
Pass
yeah,
it that way if you'd like.
Sure, sorry, I didn't bring enough.
so you're saying that whole corner you would.
That whole corner we own.
Okay.
Yes, we own the entire corner. The mobile,
This is the one I'm referring to
Yes.
right here, is this one.
All right.
Not sure freestanding versus strip mall is important to me. I think it's still secure either location. Personally, I don't think I see, you know, as long as we're still the 100 feet away. But I guess I don't know more than what we've just said about that.
I mean, to me, I think freestanding would be more important than even the 100 feet buffer.
Yeah.
I think you still have to have space between residential, and I think it needs to be more than 100 feet.
And we're already gonna have a nice brand-new brick wall behind them.
Are we?
Changing ownership.
Yeah, change in ownership.
Since we're trading,
6-foot masonry wall, 6
Yeah.
since we're trading
Familiar
papers, I
story.
actually have a map with the 300-foot buffer to kind of give you a little, if you want to take a look and see how few places there are with 300-foot buffer.
And that's not even including churches and schools eliminated, because on this map here too, we don't have the buffer for churches and schools.
I personally, I think the 100-foot is fine, and
Yeah.
also allowing a special land use if need be. The amount of red left on the 94 and 9 mile section, there's no way that's enough room to build something, I think, if I'm looking at it correctly.
No.
It's just a sliver next to the sidewalk.
Except the building is already built, and if they desired to do that, they could always go before the ZBA. Because proximity to residential right in that area is, it looks to me like there's a buffer zone there, so. There's already a rock fence there, is there not? I mean, you guys have looked at that because so many people
There
have come
is.
forward for that.
I believe
building.
there is,
There's
already,
a
yes,
large
yes.
fence already because it was a bank previously.
Right, and like I said, there's gonna be change of ownership, so any of these properties are gonna have to put a masonry wall up if it backs to residential.
Now, Laura, the way that we could, I think you indicated a special land use could be used if the residential buffer is too onerous, if someone wanted to request, to be closer to the residential. Is that what you were indicating?
The special land use was recommended by the Planning Commission for all medical marijuana facilities. That's just the process they would follow. So even religious institutions in residential districts are special land use, and it just allows for the city to notice in the paper and to allow residents and property owners within 300 feet to come to the meeting or send written correspondence and say, X, Y, and Z, this impacts my property, and I'd like to see additional landscaping or the parking a little bit further away, or I'm concerned about noise. So the Planning Commission's recommendation was to have all of the medical marijuana facilities go through that process to give the public an opportunity to comment. The difference would be, in this case of 9 Mile and 94, is that if the building is only partially within that red space, that would be allowable in the B3, they could seek a variance. And if it was an existing building, it might be considered a nonconformity, and they would have to determine a use variance. If it was a new build, it would be a dimensional variance.
Mr. Albright?
B3, by the way, B3.
I don't believe we allow use
We
variances
do
in the
not.
city, do
When
we?
the zoning ordinance was amended back, I think in, was that 2013 or so, that variance type was eliminated.
That's right. I forgot about that. The cities had the opportunity in
They had the
Michigan
discretion
to
not
opt in or
allow
out.
use variances, and the city of Eastpointe decided not to entertain those types of requests.
Correct.
So is there a way then, 9 Mile and 994 with the 100-foot, there'd be a way to use that area some sort of way, other than, I guess there's of course ZBA, but that would probably be unsuccessful, I'm guessing.
Well, they would apply for a dimensional variance.
Dimensional variance. Does that, through ZBA, or no? Yeah.
The ZBA.
Yeah, dimensional variances can be reviewed by the Eastpointe Zoning Board of Appeals.
Okay. And that wouldn't be the, as Mr. Lubeck was saying, self-created, I guess? You could explain that as not self-created? I don't want to just set up some scenario where it's like impossible.
It's not feasible. Well, there are several tenants that the ZBA would have to evaluate in determining if it was, in fact, if there was a hardship. And one of those is if the variance is self-created. They could weigh the other criteria, and ultimately, it's their decision on the findings. The ZBA does not want to create precedent for something that doesn't have findings, but if there were unique characteristics to the property, that is one criteria that can be a finding for favor of a variance.
Yeah, there's some of the criteria, for instance, the odd shape of a lot, if the property cannot be used for anything else other than what is being proposed. So there's several standards and factors that are considered.
What about in east of Kelly, we discussed as it being regional commercial, right? So would that be
Talking about the north section?
on 9 Mile, yeah, east of Kelly? Oh, I think, well, this is the one, I think that, at least,
Former location of the bank.
yeah.
So on this map, it looks like there's some pluses in locations that are currently gas stations. At 10 Mile and Kelly on the east side of 10 Mile and Kelly, and at 9 Mile and Kelly on the corner.
The pluses are purely illustrative, just to show parcels that could potentially in the future be developed under this scenario with the buffer and the separation. It's not to indicate that they are ideal for such a location today.
Okay, so Mr. Albright, what are the main parts of an ordinance that we need to look at tonight?
Well, I think that we can use this opportunity to go through the different types of facilities. There's already been a consensus that provisioning centers would be allowed. I believe that there's council consensus that 3, and the planning commission's already came up with that recommendation as well. There's already a consensus that growers would not be permitted in the city of Eastpointe, and that leaves then a transportation facility, a testing facility, and a processing facility. I know that the planning commission has touched on, I believe maybe transportation and
The testing.
Yes.
I thought they.
But there's been no
I thought they
agreement.
discussed no processing, if I thought I remember that from our last meeting. Or maybe it was just brought up.
Before I took you out, I think that was the discussion that we didn't really want to talk about that. We focused in on the dispensary aspect.
Yeah, we jumped
think
around
that-
a little bit, but then we pulled it back in to
Yeah.
just focus on
Provisioning.
provisioning.
So
That could be
Madam Mayor, I think this evening would be a good time to have that discussion with everyone present.
With transporting?
Before we move
Any of
on
the-
to
Any of
that,
the 3 remaining facilities.
I've heard a couple different comments in terms of buffering to residential. And
I think-
I just want to leave here with a clear idea of where council is on that.
I think the majority of us agree with your recommendation of 100 feet from residential.
I disagree, and I don't know what Ms. Owens is gonna do. I think the buffer zone needs to be a little bit further. I think it needs to be, because I think, remember in the ordinances that we got from the other cities, I think it was the larger buffer zone from residential.
It was a larger
I think you're
buffer
gonna run
zone.
into problems with residents.
But those communities also have different boundaries, so to speak, and in different areas that could be used for these types of facilities.
As an example, in Mount Clemens, I think that their buffer zone from residential is a little bit further, and I think they only came up with 2 sites, correct, on Groesbeck?
Yeah, the 2 communities that you looked at were Harrison Township and Mount Clemens.
And Harrison Township currently only has growers, even though they have their ordinance developed.
Yeah, and you know, this is an ordinance that can always be amended in the future.
I thought it made sense to match it to what liquor stores have, but I was kind of reading the tea leaves and I was like, I don't think anyone wants to
No,
go
I mean,
down.
I
So I'm
agree.
fine with
I
100.
think what liquor stores has too would probably be appropriate. But if planning commission already made the recommendation of 100 feet, I would support their decision.
I have to disagree, because how far is it from here to the end of the building?
3 feet.
How far?
Kidding.
That one. But, yeah, and what Mr. Director Rohib said about the 100 feet, actually, I would feel completely comfortable 100 feet, living 100 feet from a responsible dispensary, and that's why we've had many, many meetings here, and I'm glad we're going slowly through this to make sure they are responsible. I do completely understand what you're saying, so I'm comfortable with the 100 feet also.
100 feet.
I agree, I'd rather
freestanding.
be 100 feet from a provisioning center than 100 feet from a bar. I mean, then that's my opinion, but.
All right, so it's 3 to 1. I just think it should be further.
Chairman Lubick, I have to agree with you, Mayor. I would like to see 150. Because if there's a problem, when the business comes there, because the residents are upset, we can play with 50 feet. We can take, you understand what I'm saying?
Correct, I
All right.
hear you.
And I think that would open up a number of places. But the other thing is, in the motion that was made last month, or this month at the meeting, there was no number placed for churches, schools.
Right.
And I don't want to leave that open to interpretation. And I'm happy with 3 to 500, whatever anybody wants to do. You know, we have a standard of 3, and I'd be happy with that.
I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I would even be fine with 500 feet from a school or a church.
500 feet from a school.
From a school or a church.
What's just for reference,
But
what's
100 feet to somebody's house.
what's the,
Who might have.
For a liquor
I think a
store,
school
the
is a little
distance.
bit different though than a
Why?
resident. Because a residential homeowner, when you buy a property already backing a business, I mean, it's different. They already purchased that property that is already backing a business area.
But what about an established resident that's been there for a long time, and all of a sudden you're gonna put a provisioning center right there, and you have a back entrance that's gonna be less than 50 feet from their house? And they have kids. But
Well, I mean, we could do 100 feet from schools and churches too. I just thought 500 feet would be more appropriate.
I think so too.
I'm fine with 500 as well.
yeah, how does,
Mr.
How's
Albert, you
planning
writing
feel?
all this down?
I'm not okay with 500 feet. Sorry.
From schools and churches, do you
I'm
think
not
it should
okay.
be 1,000?
I will split the difference and say 750. But I do not think 500 is appropriate.
And then what do you think about the residents? How far from a resident?
What does
I-
the rest of planning feel about
Well, the
this?
problem is, if you look at the limited space we've got in the city, if we go 500 feet from residences, we're done.
No.
We're done with the discussion, we're done with the ordinances, we're just not gonna have any in the city, because nobody can meet that requirement.
I'm
just
saying
church and school.
300 feet from resident.
What about, you're asking the
What
rest
about
of planning
church-
commission about churches and schools?
Churches and schools, like what everyone else would feel, because we heard from
750.
John.
Mr. Brill?
Yeah, we know, John.
I don't know that I have a real strong opinion on that one. 100 feet from residents, I feel very comfortable with that. From churches, I agree it should be longer. I don't know what's right. 500, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
500. I'd be comfortable with 500.
Me too.
From school and church, like?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. And then from a residence?
100.
Okay.
Jeff, did you say?
All right. 100 feet wins.
100 and 500.
Ms. Hod, did you know for, just for reference for liquor stores and churches and schools?
I'm not seeing it for language for liquor stores. It may be something that's in the business license itself outside of the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
For adult entertainment establishments, it's 600 feet from any public park or church.
Seems to me like our liquor store.
All right,
is
Mr.
pretty
Albert, what's
lenient,
next?
So there might not be much.
We've discussed as far as the buffer zones, but I still think that we should talk about transportation, testing, and processing.
All right.
How about 2 for transportation,
Oh, okay.
just to get
What's-
started?
Okay. I mean,
Because
I'm
they don't-
open to transportation. I don't think transportation is really gonna be a huge concern.
What's the requirement there? Where, from the 3 provisional units, you're talking about transporting from there? We don't have any growers.
No, the transportation are just, from what I understand, really just a parking lot for cars to come and go and house the secure transports. They're not allowed to have any marijuana on the site.
So they go and the transportation company, like, basically owns like vans, and they would go to the growers, they would securely transport it to the provisioning center. So the grower doesn't necessarily have to be in the city, they would just be supplying the vehicle to go back and
The
forth.
closest thing maybe is like a Brinks armored truck.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Right.
think of an armored car for marijuana.
Right, like an armored car company or something.
I have been driving past a secure transport facility since it opened, probably over a year. It's an interesting looking facility. They've got about 5 or 6 vans, there's 5 or 6 cars there. You don't really notice that they're there, other than they look a little bit different because of the security around the building. So I don't have much of a problem with that. Testing facilities, I say we could go unlimited on that, just put a distance requirement in, because the testing facility that I'm familiar with, you don't even realize there's a business in there. It almost looks like an abandoned building.
Yeah, because the rest of
And
these
that's,
license-
you would not want to put a bunch of those together, because you would have a whole, I'm thinking of one former medical plaza on Kelly that right now is vacant, and if it were to, all of it to be a testing facility, it wouldn't look that much different, because the employees would probably park in the back, the front parking lot would be empty, and that's probably not something you would want in large clusters. You'd want to separate those.
So what is planning's opinion on how many transportation facilities?
Why do we need transportation? What is the justification for having transportation?
Well, for me, it's just to bring another opportunity for a business to open in the city, and I don't think there's any disadvantage to transportation.
But wouldn't it be a transient business? These people are going to be coming and going. We're only going to have 3 facilities in our community. We're not going to have any growing operations.
You're assuming that they're only serving our community, and that
They
is
could
not
serve,
true.
they could serve other communities. It's just a place for them to store their trucks.
They could
So
service
they're
Warren.
storing their trucks, so they could service Warren or, because they're gonna be opening facilities and.
So there's really not going to be that much. They're going to own a lot. They'll pay their taxes, which anybody who
Right.
owns a lot now is paying taxes,
And they'll probably put up some sort of security fence around the property
which
to
will look
secure their trucks.
lovely, I'm sure. But I guess I don't see the positive value to having a transportation company based in the city. Essentially, it's going to be a secured parking lot. There's nothing visually appealing about it. People are going to be coming and going, so it's not like they're going to be coming in and dropping a couple $100s at local businesses. They're coming in, dropping off, picking up, leaving. They're no more than a pot taxi service. So where is the positive, where is the value being brought to our city by having transportation companies? There's no value to it. I can't see a value to it.
See,
I can at least see value to dispensaries. I can see value to having testing facilities. My God, I would have 10 testing facilities, because this is a horrible thing that we're doing right now, having untested product and untested herbs going out to the communities. Let's be known as the city that secures marijuana for the masses, but I just don't see the need to have a parking lot. Look at everybody's outrage when drive time went up, because they were all ticked off that there was not a nice development going in there. We wanted housing, we wanted retailing, we put a car lot in, everybody gets bashed. Essentially, you're gonna put a pot car lot up. There is no value to having that in the city. And I might be twisting in the wind here and tilting at windmills, but I see no value.
To go on what the chief said about waiting, we're all assuming. We don't know. We don't know how many facilities we're going to have. We don't know how many distribution or transportation units we're going to have. We don't know how this is going to blow up. I mean, it could be small, it could be big. We don't know. That's why 90% of the cities in this area have either opted out or taken a wait and see and we should do the same thing.
We could offer 2 licenses and nobody ever come to the city. Every business, though, that's in the city, Mr. DeHaan and Mr. Jacoby, it's not gonna be some fun restaurant. Look in any thriving downtown area, you'll see all kinds of places that you probably never noticed were there if you look close enough, like, a doctor's office or eyeglass shop, or there will be a gas station. I mean, every single thing's not gonna be some
What
fun.
difference does it make if we do it now or after the first of the year? At that point, we'll know if we need a trucking firm, we'll know how many testing facilities we would need. We don't even know what those 2 laws are gonna be like 3 months from now.
No, we're talking about medical, though. Medical's all set, recreational's not.
Well, they're changing medical laws now.
Right, but I think that we are getting a little off, because we are just talking about medical. I think right now, as a council, we haven't really made a decision on recreational marijuana.
Yeah.
I think that's actually gonna be on our next agenda, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
So that's totally different than what we're discussing right now.
But based on what Mr. Palazzola told us, when he went to that meeting with Laura Hall, what did you say at our last meeting when the guy talked to you about recreational marijuana? You got very upset.
Yeah, Director Brisboe came out and said that, they intend to have things relatively finalized in June to begin accepting applications, and the first licenses may be issued as early as September. And the attorney who followed behind him said that if you're not prepared, then you are de facto opting in. So you need to be prepared to act.
And that's why it's on our next agenda, because we are going to act, per your recommendation and our attorney's recommendation.
So the
we
council's-
are gonna act on the recreational part.
You're gonna opt out.
Well, we haven't voted on it yet.
Well, you're considering that.
We are considering that. I mean, it's gonna come to, a vote next Tuesday, at our next meeting, so, But right now, we're talking about medical, which we opted in for medical. Correct?
Now, what Mr. Palazzola.
Did we?
Trying to.
Did
We
we?
haven't done anything.
We haven't.
What Mr. Palazzola told us.
The way the law is written, the city didn't have to specifically opt in or opt out with regard to medical, but recreational, completely different. If the city doesn't take any action,
All right.
the city's deemed to, by default, opt
Right.
in.
But we haven't taken any action formally on
With
medical
regard-
marijuana
other-
either.
Other than to request that the planning commission review a possible ordinance for
Correct.
consideration regarding dispensaries.
So I don't have strong feelings on transportation. I know, John, you shared what your feelings are. I'd like to know what planning thinks as a whole, because I'd probably just be inclined to follow their recommendation.
Okay,
I
well, let's
agree.
start.
I would be happy to follow the recommendation on transportation also.
But you're not on the planning commission except liaison.
No, I'm saying right now, no, you're right. I'm saying the same point as Michael, is that as a council person, we were asked to give them our opinion. And I'm saying I would go
But
with their
Michael
opinion.
is asking for the planning commission to talk,
Yeah.
to voice their opinion on those 2 things, transport and testing.
Yeah, so I personally have no problem, if we're going to go forward with a dispensary, then I see no problem with transportation, processors, or testing. I have no issue with that. If we're going, I mean, if the bar is set that we're already going forward with a dispensary, to me, those are lower risk, if you will. So I have no issue.
I don't agree with that when it comes to processing.
What about transport?
I've stated I have no problem with transport or testing.
I agree with that.
Yeah, we don't have the room for a processing plant.
Yeah.
Same thing with growing.
We could make it Pot Point. Go on. All right. So, John, what did you?
I think I made my point abundantly clear about transportation. And I'm not saying that every business has to be pretty and bring people to it. I don't want you to think that I'm looking for another brew pub, but I'm not looking for a car lot. And I'm not looking
Another,
for,
did I miss one? Did one open in the city?
God forbid we get one.
Mr. Jacobia? Or John, were you done?
As far as the testing, I'm all for it. I don't see any reasoning for processing. So, no transport, yes testing.
I'm all for testing. And I think we should wait to find out if there's a need for transport. We don't know.
And Leo, what did you say?
I have no problem with
With what?
testing. No problem with transport.
I think we should wait and see on all of it. I don't think we know enough about any of these facilities to make an informed opinion about any of them, to be honest with you. This is an entirely new business in the state. It's still getting its feet underneath it, so to speak. And it would be wise, I think, to wait and see what a well-documented, informed decision might look like. And anything absent that, I wouldn't support, to be honest with you, whether in recommendation or in any other capacity.
So would you support the provisioning centers?
I would support a provisioning center under certain conditions. I was the lone no vote because John abandoned me in the last meeting, and I'm not afraid to tell him that right now. Because he left me before I could chastise him properly at the last meeting. But I was the lone no vote on the Planning Commission recommendation. So I think that there need to be some more restrictive requirements on provisioning centers.
Madam Mayor, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I saw you abandon him. You were on TV when you abandoned him.
Yeah, it was very well documented. I just haven't been able to thoroughly document my
I turned green, might I say. Thank you for outing me.
Yep, no problem. That's why I'm here.
So, Mr. Palazzolo, I have a great deal of respect for because he is passionate about what he says and what he does, and most everything that he does is law-based and factual. He doesn't shoot from the hip like I do, which I have great respect for. Present company excluded these gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen in the room who have a large financial interest in this community, right, or they're hoping to have a large financial interest in this community. I completely agree with them. I am willing to bend, as it were, on 3 dispensaries, but he is completely right. Chief is completely right. Walter is completely right. I have great concerns as to why we are rushing into this. I understand we've been playing with this thing for months, and I completely understand where, some on council, their position is. But this is the issue of our time. You might not think it, you might think I'm just blowing smoke, but this is the issue of our time. This is changing everything in this state. We have roads falling apart, but yet we have the time to support marijuana as a recreational drug. We have infrastructures falling apart, but yet we're so consumed with making sure everybody has the ability to have a dime bag of whatever it is. I don't like being rushed. That said, I will do my best on this commission, but I think we're rushing it. I really do. I don't understand what the dire need is. Now, if these folks have buildings under contract, I'm sorry. If they've made financial investments, I'm sorry. And obviously, Siri is in support of this.
She's been waiting to speak up this whole time.
I told her not to call me here.
Yeah. That better have been your wife. So I have grave concerns about us rushing into everything. It's tantamount to buying a new car. Who buys a new car the first year? It makes no sense. Why wouldn't we wait? If we're saying that we're denying the residents of the city of Eastpointe the ability to have their medicine, there are other facilities, there are other communities that have these places they can go to in the interim. I'm certainly not saying that we don't do anything. There are places to go. And again, my apologies to our audience and your financial investment or desire to have a financial investment in the city. I don't like being rushed. And let's think about what we have in front of us right now. We are working with an ordinance. We're trying to put an ordinance together, but yet we're worried about the gentleman who has Don's Budwagon. We're worried about the Bank of America people. We're worried about the 10 Mile and Gratiot people. They should not matter to us in making this ordinance. just all I'm gonna say, and again, please, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, I have no disrespect to you, but we are meant to make an ordinance, and it should not matter where the buildings are, who owns the buildings, what presentations are being made. As far as I'm concerned, if somebody's gonna make a presentation to us about a special land use, why wouldn't you do that until after the ordinance is put in place? It's like putting the cart before the horse. We're putting the cart before the horse. But we're rushing right in. So I'm sure somebody's gonna have a comment about my comment here. But I had to get that off my chest.
Well, comment, yep, on your commentary, Mr. Palazzolo's. I don't think at all we're rushing into this. We've been talking about it since December 2017 at least. If we talked about everything that came to council that long, we would be meeting in meetings 80 hours a week all year. So I think we've definitely taken our time on this, and there is for sure a certain amount of risk if you are the first to do something. I think having all these meetings and discussing this, we're reducing that risk as much as possible. And I think if everyone's talking about bringing brew pubs here, we can't just be following every other city, or all the other cities are gonna get the breweries and then we're gonna be behind. I think I'd like us to take a leadership role in different areas, not just here, but all kinds of different areas. So I don't think at all we've been rushing this. We've discussed, I mean, everybody knows, seems is pretty well informed about all the different types, recreational and medical, and all the different licenses. And now we're just discussing the minor details, I think.
I'd like to ask, in the room, how many of you people that are in the audience are actual residents?
How many pay taxes in the city of Eastpointe?
How many pay taxes? And how many are willing to have a place 100 feet from your back door?
I have 1,000 feet.
I'll take 50.
All right, so all right, let's go back to you so we can work on this ordinance.
So we were talking about transporters. I think I didn't really come up with a consensus on whether that was going to be permitted or not. And if it was going to be permitted, how many?
Well, I
And-
don't know, Cardi wants it, Sarah wants it.
I threw out two.
I
But
don't want it.
I just, at the end, I was happy to follow whatever the planning commission wanted to do.
I don't
Um,
Why
want
don't we
it.
just do
And testing
two across the board
facilities,
for all three? Or did we
Well,
have a,
3? Where,
We're doing 3 provisioning centers.
well, not
So
not
2,
counting that one.
but I think planning might not be 2 across the board, because I think I know most of them said okay with transportation and testing, but when it came to the processing, I don't think they were all okay with
No,
processing.
it sounded like no for processing.
I thought it was.
Yeah, I
no.
thought it sounded like no for
That
processing
was just my
also.
suggestion. I wasn't summarizing.
okay.
And I think I
the
got
discussion.
three people that
Okay,
were for the
be-
transport.
before we proceed, Mayor, if I could, I think Ms. Howe would like to make a comment about transportation facilities.
Oh, thank you. Just if those would be intended in the B3 zoning district as well, or if those would just be more limited to the industrial district, where there might be excess parking.
In industrial, in Eastpointe?
Along 10 Mile. If
It's got a
the
handful
city
of
did not
places.
want to have many of those facilities, that might be a,
Where do you have available industrial on 10 Mile?
There isn't.
Well, she probably doesn't know available plots at the moment.
yeah, this would just be for the future.
And the only
Or if
other
someone-
industrial zone we have is on Stevens, correct?
Yes, but Stevens is removed because of the setbacks. But on 10 Mile, if that's where you wanted to concentrate the traffic with the transport, if a building were to be purchased, facility, warehouse.
That seems sensible to me, because if that land ever changes ownership, I have no reason to see why transportation would be bad to go in that area.
I agree. I think transportation in the industrial area would be
And
the
actually,
ideal spot.
now that you said industrial and transportation, Stevens, the last few months, the Planning Commission did work on a masonry wall / screening situation on an industrial property on Stevens, which would make an ideal transportation facility in my mind, because it really wouldn't change anything there. There's plenty of room behind that building. It's not going to be a high-traffic situation. I mean, it just in my mind, it kind of hit me that that might be an ideal location for a transport facility.
Well, so should we just not, we won't do like this buffer, the 100-foot map only for dispensaries then, and we could just go with industrial?
Just straight industrial for transportation?
Is that what you're saying then, Jen? I think.
That could be part of the discussion. Where would we want to put a transportation facility?
So you're
In
saying it
what
has to
zoning
go into
districts?
an industrial zone?
I'm not saying it has to go in any specific zone. I'm just posing the question of, we're thinking of how many of these facilities, where would they like to be located? Industrial, maybe one such district.
Right, no, I was just trying to ask Mr. Lubeck if that seemed reasonable.
What size trucks
Industrial.
are we talking about?
Yeah,
here?
Vans.
These are not
No idea what we're
53-foot
talking
trailers.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, B1, B3, I don't know why we have to limit it
B3
to
plus.
industrial.
And that when they do these laws, Mr. Palazzolo, they might come back and say, all transport has to be in this size truck, and that's not gonna be available in the zone that you've already chosen.
Well, the transport facility that I'm familiar with, they have three, I can't remember what brand they are, but 3 vans, full-size vans, and I believe 4 or 5 minivans.
Is it in, what's the zoning for that place you're talking about?
I have no idea what the zoning is.
Okay.
So, can
But I know it does back right up against a residential area.
Yep. You and I saw.
I believe Councilwoman Lucido and Commissioner Jakubiec have been past the facility.
Yeah, it backs right to residential.
Mr. Palazzolo, you're just dying to talk.
I know, I just want to ask a question, and I don't mean to put Ms. Hahn on the spot, but even though I'm going to. So I apologize in advance, but, I mean, do you feel, and you can say no, right? Do you feel comfortable explaining to everyone here the typical size, construction, layout, traffic volume, operational characteristics of a transport facility, of a supply facility, and of a lab?
No.
Okay.
And
Well.
as part of the presentation that we gave at the joint meeting in August, Sarah Traxler and myself from our office shared some statistics that we had found and had pulled together that summer from facilities in Colorado. But that doesn't necessarily translate to what's happening here. And then in some of the other communities that we work in, like let's say Buena Vista, River Rouge, Ecorse, that have opted in for medical marijuana facilities and have ordinances and allow these facilities. I've looked briefly at some of the site plans that we've approved. It's all across the board, whether it's an existing, most of the facilities are existing buildings that people occupy, so it's very difficult to determine if they're really using all that square footage at this point, or if it's just there in excess. So there's too many unknowns right now to really quantify, and I think the Planning Commission at least has heard at some of the meetings a response from individuals involved in the industry claiming that this is the parking associated, but right now we just don't have the statistics available, at least in Michigan, to really say across the board this is what's happening in other communities. We just kind of know anecdotally from some, but it's also difficult because every community is built out so different, and here in Eastpointe we have these smaller commercial corridors with residential in close proximity and a traditional downtown along Gratiot, smaller industrial base. So, you know, it's very unique, and there are a lot of uncertainties at this point.
I think B3 plus is fine, B3 or industrial is fine with me for transport, or all the other 3 types we're talking about, transport, testing. and
You're gonna say
processing.
B3 anywhere in the city?
You're with the 1,000-foot buffer, are you saying with the 1,000-foot buffer, because that's what the
For
map
the-
shows?
Oh, between
I'm saying, are you,
each of them?
are you, when you say, are you saying B3 in industrial, is that with the 1,000-foot buffer?
You mean
100? 100, I mean 100-foot buffer for residential, or without it? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Oh,
With or
good
without
question.
buffer.
I think, I don't know if I have a strong opinion either way for those types, since they're not really the public-facing businesses.
I don't have an opinion either, I was just asking for clarification.
And Ms. Hall, we could make all of these facilities, regardless of type, special land use
Correct.
as an extra level of protection.
And the numbers are,
I'm for that.
you want to set the numbers? You want to give a number to transport, a number to testing facilities?
We also considering processors.
We can talk about that next.
So just transportation and testing.
How many? In what locale?
about
You want
two
to
and
say
two?
anywhere in a B3 area? So that in the middle of Kelly Road, you can set up a transport facility?
There's not much B3 on Kelly.
So
Well,
you're
there
gonna have
is
to do
if we
some type of
remove the
limitation.
buffer.
What, the 100-foot?
If
No,
we
I mean.
remove the 100-foot, then we'll have
No, but
more-
most of Kelly, though's not B3, it's B1, right? Ms. Hall?
There are portions of Kelly that are B3. This map excludes those portions of Kelly and also 9 Mile because.
Well, no, I know this map does. I'm in the master plan here, right? It'd just be regional commercials, B3, right? On the,
It would be the zoning map.
And
that
how
would
close to
apply.
a residence?
yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the future land use one too, which would be at least what we want to do in the future, right? And there's only, 9 in Kelly and 8 in Kelly are the only regional commercial. So I guess.
Those nodes.
Going,
Yeah, I think there is more B3 though than what's highlighted on the stat order
all right.
for Bert, Brown, or whatever.
Well, I guess if my suggestions is 2 and 2 for each of them, and B3 or industrial, though is fine with me. Just anywhere in B3 or industrial. I don't know what else everyone else is thinking.
That seemed fine by me.
I'm fine with that.
I'm not. I just don't think that the laws are clear as to the location and how far they have to be from residential. And if I were living there, where you have a B3 along Kelly Road, and all of a sudden you have trucks coming in transporting pot, I would be very unhappy to see that.
Has anyone ever discussed like hours of operation? For
I think the
for
hours
any
of
these
operation are, that law is coming down from the state, as I recall.
things? Okay.
Well, and they could be modified under special land use rules too. I mean, we would reserve the right to make, we, the planning commission, would reserve the right, if the ordinance was written a certain way, to make recommendations to you all as to what the appropriate hours of operation might be, if it's under a special land
And
use.
I heard that some of the provisioning centers in the city of Detroit were open 24 hours. But I know the state was coming in and closing some of those, so.
Mr. Albright, can't we put in the ordinance the hours or that they can't operate past a certain time and before a certain time? So we can put that right in the ordinance. So we don't want them operating after 9 o'clock. We put that right in the ordinance. They don't operate after 9 o'clock or
And I would expect we'd want.
some sort.
would
I think
want
we
that
would
in.
want some sort
So
of
bottom
operating.
line, council is suggesting that we have 3 dispensaries in what type of, and then with only 100 foot from residential, correct?
Yes.
And
Yes.
500 from school and churches. And then transport facilities, you're suggesting,
And there's also a 1,000-foot distance between various facilities.
so
Yes,
you've
yes.
got that written down? And then you're suggesting, council is suggesting a transport facility, and you're suggesting 3 of them in what zone?
Two.
2
of
in
each.
what zone?
B3 or industrial.
B3 or industrial. And testing facilities,
2, right? The
and
same-
where is
same
that
zoning
location?
again.
Same zones.
And same space? And then, okay, let's go to the wonderful processing.
One more comment on the provisioning centers. I believe, at least I have in my notes here, that they should be freestanding businesses.
No.
What's Planning Commission's opinion on that?
I'm behind that. I think it's a good idea.
Freestanding, how many?
Remember, we can always back it down if we, in the future, feel that, well, you know what, maybe a strip mall's appropriate. We can
agree.
dial anything down, you know.
I'm just real
Or dial it up,
concerned
rather.
about these types of questions and what the state is gonna come out with, because currently, it's just limbo about, there are no real set decisions at all. All right, Jeff, what was your thing, freestanding or,
I'm in favor of freestanding.
John?
Freestanding.
Walter?
Freestanding.
Freestanding.
Yeah, I would agree.
That makes it easy, freestanding.
You guys already know my opinion on
Yeah.
it, so.
And the other thing was all of these.
Other than you
are
do
special
realize
land
council
use.
has the opportunity to overrule us. So it really doesn't matter what we say if council's not on board with that.
I'm not gonna overrule.
Why are you
that.
gonna remind us of that, Mr.?
We've
Mr.
made
Albrecht, what's
recommendations
next?
before that we've been overruled
We're
on.
here trying to work with you guys to come up
Mr.
with.
Albrecht, what's next?
Processing facilities.
All right, so a couple people have strong opinions on that. Do you want to share your opinion? Processing facility.
Again, I don't, and my personal opinion on it, I don't think we have practical locations for that. You have to be concerned with smells, aromas, fumes. And I kind of see those along the same lines as a grow operation. I don't think we have the space for them.
Mr. Broll?
I think I'm the only one that doesn't have a strong opinion against it. I don't have a strong opinion for it. I would need more information to shoot it down, let me put it that way. As I understood it, there is minimal smell. There may be a little smell, but no, we have other businesses that also have associated odors, and they're in our city as well, so.
I think that was the first one that the Michigan State Police closed down in Centerline, was it not? They set one up and they set it all up, and I think the MSP came in and closed it down almost immediately. You probably know that, George. It was over by Sherwood.
I believe so, yes.
John?
Nope.
Walter?
No.
Leo?
No.
All right, I guess the majority says we're not having a processing.
Works for me.
What's next?
You could also have a discussion this evening on how a particular license is selected. We had it by, in the one proposed ordinance, it was by way of a lottery, and then the other one had it by way of a committee.
Not a lottery. I think that's a bad idea.
Yeah, I think that's a bad idea.
I think a committee composed of administration following up. But I also think that Mr. Pauzola's opinion is well taken, that, and I also, the woman in the back, that you have to go with state licensure or background checks done by the state.
Be pre-qualified, yeah.
Before, right, before applications. What
Yeah,
else?
Mayor, that's all I have this evening. Ms. Hawk, for purposes of tonight's meeting, I think both the City Council and the Planning Commission have covered a lot of ground this evening. And so, Ms. Hawk, if you have anything further to add at this time?
Just to be clear, is there a separation between like uses for the secured transport and the testing?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Is it the council and commission's wish that there would be 1,000-foot separation or 500-foot separation between like uses?
I think only for the dispensaries.
Sounds good.
I don't have an opinion. I would leave that to planning to make that decision.
I'm concerned that the state may make a decision on that as well. That's why I think it's so, as long as we've been working on it, I think the state, with the changes, they threw out the people that were there before and they brought in new people. And then they eliminated some of the license requirements, and so I think they're still in big flux up there. And I know you people sitting out here are saying, no, it's all settled, but I don't think it's settled. And I just read that the people that are really for it, many of you lobbyists that are there, were just up in Lansing, and it didn't sound like you were getting very far. I know you filed suit and said you have to settle this now, but it seems like the state is saying we're gonna delay this until at least December. I don't know. All right, so Ms. Howe, did you have anything else with that? Did you
No.
feel comfortable with that answer?
Yes, thank you.
I do have one, did you discuss, the planning commission, did you discuss an application process at all?
We weren't gonna get into that discussion until we decided what type of facilities we were gonna allow.
Okay.
It seemed like putting the cart before the horse to come up with all these other things.
I was just curious.
And then go look at it the other one and say, well, we can't accommodate any of these.
Yeah.
It just seemed like a waste of time.
Sure.
I mean, why should we spend hours discussing grow facilities or processing facilities
I wasn't
and
saying
the
we should
application
have.
processes for them? And then come to the conclusion, well, we can't accommodate them anyway.
Sure.
So then the plan is to take this back at our next council meeting and develop an ordinance, and it has to go back, back to Ms. Van Haren and Mr. Sabota.
The next planning commission meeting will actually be next Thursday.
Correct.
Mr. Albright, from the other cities that we got ordinances from, they were doing it in two different ways, correct? How were they handling it?
No,
One
Harrison.
was by a lottery system, one was by a committee.
Okay, I'd like some information on both of those so we can discuss that.
Well, actually, we were given direction this evening by city council that they wanted that done by committee.
Yeah.
You can
So
discuss
we don't
it
have
if
to
you want.
discuss lottery at all.
Correct.
Certainly discuss it if you want, but the council has indicated preference,
Yeah.
majority.
So the lottery was Harrison Township, was it not?
Not for certain.
Well, and I think for that reason, they are still just limiting it to growers.
And just curious, what about, not saying I support the idea necessarily, but a lottery, once you hit a certain amount of, like if you're pre-qualified and other qualifications, I don't know if that made sense to anybody either, or just rather do we're talking committee then, and probably take the top 3 businesses, right, for
That's the way I
dispensary.
would imagine it.
I don't wanna.
Why wouldn't you approach?
Mr. DeMonico, knowing your concerns when you're at the council table, I kind of see a lottery as saying, okay, everybody give us your bids, and then we're going to pull the one out of the hat we're going to use. So that's why I'm surprised you would consider a lottery system in this.
No, I said it, not necessarily what I support, but I didn't know if anyone had any good feedback on that.
It seems to me the people that have the best qualifications, the best financial backing, the best business plan, the best security, have them vetted by the chief,
Yep.
somebody from city administration. I wouldn't consider you part of city administration because I think as public safety director, you are kind of like over here somewhere. Maybe have somebody from Mary, maybe have somebody from city council. There should be 5 people,
I think it has to be
independent.
I think it has to be administrative people who can review the background checks and everything else, because city council doesn't have that opportunity to do that. And that's not really our role at all. We have an administrative team to do that.
I guess I kind of was just thinking that because at least these last few times we've had a committee, the committees didn't even agree if the vendors were accredited or not, and so there were wildly different numbers between the different people on the committees. So if some of these questions and some example things, like this, I have one, actually I don't even know what city this one is. One of their questions was the integrity, moral character, and reputation of the people. I mean, how do you give a 0 to 10 on probably most likely someone you don't know? Like, what's an 8 versus a 10 from someone, or, that's just where it's like, is someone, what is, that's why I guess maybe you hit a certain amount of things and we'd be comfortable with everybody, and then lottery, that's why I was asking. Again, not necessarily my way, but I've also seen where we have wildly different things on administrative committees.
Well, I think this
guess.
almost goes back to the chicken ordinance.
Mhm.
I hate to say it, but it went back and forth between council and planning commission, and when it came back, we came to some type of agreement, and then it went back to an administrative committee that came back with all the administrative details that would go into place. And I think that's essentially the same thing we'd have to have. Obviously, you'd have to have the director of public safety involved in it, and you would probably have to have the city manager, and I would assume the director of building, Mary Van Haren.
So then if I could ask the council's opinion, because I think in the past, in our our planning commission meetings, the suggestion was that we, the planning commission, evaluate two things. One is the zoning and siting requirements for businesses of this type, and then secondly, the business licensure requirements of businesses of this type. So is it still council's intent that we, the planning commission, look at the business licensure requirements and pick possible standards for administrative review? Or is that something that you will delegate down to an administrative committee for development and then further consideration? Because if it's not, then I'd really rather not waste our time discussing it this next planning commission meeting, if that's okay.
I would agree that it would go back to planning to come up with those details that you just mentioned.
For the business licensure requirements?
Correct.
Okay.
And you have the city attorney working with you, so.
Might I
And we will tax
suggest-
him thoroughly in that process, I'm sure, so, yeah.
I mean, the council can make suggestions back to you
Yeah.
and give that back to you, but I think that the final revision or suggestion would have to come from planning back to council for the final approval.
I might, if I could suggest, because if I understand what you're saying, perhaps it would make sense for an administrative committee to first come up with their own proposal to present to planning, instead of just putting it on planning from the start. I think that would make more sense and probably be more efficient than.
I would tend to agree. I mean, we can talk about it for sure, but in the end, I think that the people who will be responsible for implementing that administrative review are probably the people that you want leading the discussions on the details of what an administrative review might look like.
Absolutely.
Rather than a panel of, how many, 7 citizens who may or may not have a whole lot of experience in those types of processes.
Okay. Do you agree, Mr. Albert?
I agree, Madam Mayor.
All right. Is there anything else we need to discuss here tonight?
I do not think so at this time. Like I said, I think both City Council and Planning Commission have made a lot of progress this evening.
All right, then let's move on to the second hearing of the public and hear from anyone else. This time, 3 minutes. Anyone wish to be heard? No one? All right. That hearing of the public is closed. We'll go to mayor and council reports. Mr. Cardy DeMonico, you're first.
I think I'm all set. I think I've said enough. I think this was a very good discussion, though, so I'm glad we moved forward.
Ms. Lucia.
I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I know that this has been discussed a lot. We've been spending a lot of time, and I know planning has been working very diligently on trying to make the best recommendation to council. So I'm hoping this will help now that you kind of have some input, because I know it has been, brought back. Well, council can just change it. So now you guys have our opinion, and moving forward, hopefully, we can work on finishing this up soon.
Mr. Kleinfeld.
Just thanks to everyone for coming.
All right, Mr. Burrell.
I would just say the discussion today was around medical, and I would strongly urge you at this time to opt out of recreational.
Mr. Lubeck.
I agree with Mr. Broll's comments. The other thing is, because of feedback we've been getting about what's happening at the state level, we feel like we're trying to hit a moving target, which is kind of frustrating.
Ms. Howe, would you like to put some comment?
Just thank you for your feedback tonight.
Mr. Hahn?
I agree with Mr. Broll in opting out. I have to thank Chairman Lubeck for bringing up chickens. I think that might have just given me a headache. I also want to apologize for running out and tossing my cookies. Last meeting, it was not my intent, so my apologies to everybody, and for everybody that was in the audience, which most of you were. I was not tired, I was just getting sick, and I didn't mean to yawn in front of people. So, this has been an interesting meeting. You're all probably just waiting for this, aren't you? I'm scared. I'm scared that we're hearing from business owners, and we're hearing from a handful of individuals that live in the city that support it. I wonder what the members of PACE and the various churches, how they would feel about it. We know that Dr. Early from the school board came out vehemently opposed to what we're attempting to do. That said, I find it very interesting that there is as much opposition as there is support for it. So we will do our due diligence. I will vote my conscience. I will probably get beaten or stabbed in the parking lot, one of the two. But the point is, when I say that I feel like we're being forced and we're being pushed along, it's just my feeling. Maybe my perception is wrong. But this whole medical thing is wonderful, and I after last week's meeting, I probably could have used a joint to feel better. But I have to say, there are concerns when recreational becomes legal. What happens to these medical facilities? It becomes a moot point. So there's still a lot of unknowns, and to use Chairman Lubeck's terms, we're shooting at a moving target. So.
Mr. Jakubiec?
Yeah, I like that we've made some headway in this, but when it comes down to it, we should wait. I don't see any reason why we have to jump into it now. It's like diving off a dock and you don't know how deep the water is. Okay. Both the laws, the medical marijuana and recreation, they're still moving. Nothing's set in stone. We don't know how that's going to impact us. Just recently I was talking to somebody who read an article about the governor of Colorado, and he was present when that law went into effect. And he said, everybody thinks we're going to make a lot of money, and we're not. This is a waste of time. And one of the things he brought out, he says, once we release it onto the public and they start putting in one dispensary after another, now there's going to be competition. So one of them says, gee, maybe I can drop the price $20. And then all of a sudden his competition says the same thing. Maybe I can drop it a little more. And so all the money that they thought was there is going to go away because of competition. And now we have a problem with the states saying yes, and the federal government says no. Another friend of mine talked to a police officer who had another twist to it. He says, if the federal government says, okay, it's legal, what's going to stop the cigarette manufacturers from jumping into this? I thought that was an interesting point. I'm done.
Mr. Lalonde?
Well, I agree with some of my colleagues that we're moving too fast. I'd like to see what other experiences cities and townships have. And I will say it's been an interesting meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Pelzo?
No, I agree with the other comments of the Planning Commission. I think that an opt-out of the recreational program is a good idea. I think that we should allow the opportunity to sort of wait and see how this unfolds, at least on the medical side, and then we can make a more informed decision down the road. But that's it. Thank you for your time.
Chief?
No, just thanks for having me here. The only thing I have to say is just, education is power. I think there's a little bit, actually, there's a lot more homework that needs to be done on this. That's all I ask. Just be careful and just don't be in a rush. Because the marijuana law, I have to tell you, of all the laws on the books, it is so ambiguous, and it's really confused a lot of us, and we're still confused. We don't even have all the answers yet because the state of Michigan doesn't have all the answers. So that's all I say, just be careful. Go into this slowly, that's all.
Mr. Albright?
Well, I'll speak for Ms. Haw as well. This has been quite the experience, and we're looking forward to bringing an ordinance forward that is reflective of all of the desires of both the Planning Commission and the City Council.
So I guess I'm the last one to comment, and I have to comment that I spent the last 9 days in Colorado. And it was an interesting TV situation when they were promoting a workshop that was teaching people how to drive while they're high. And it was even more interesting when I went to Rocky Mountain National Park and at the entrance to Estes Park, which if you've been to that area, is quite elevated. And I saw a number of people open up their back door of their car, take out their pot, roll it, and then take their pictures on this precipice that was dropping down about 2,000 feet. I was a little bit scared. I thought I was going to have to do a lot of first aid. And, but it was more so because they were going up and down these mountain roads. If you've never been into Estes Park, you go down this narrow, winding path down to Estes Park. And there had been snow, and I'm just going to do this real quick. There had been snow up in the mountains, 16 inches of snow. It was the worst May ever, 45 years. But apparently it didn't get to all the people that were smoking pot for that day because they were out in Everland, and so they were really happy. And I watched these cars go down this mountain road, and I saw this big elk just jump out on the side. Well, you're not always most alert when you're smoking pot. So the elk almost hit him. They went down a little bit further. There were 5 more elk, and it was a trip just watching what was happening. And it's a very interesting place because there are multiple cities. Not every city, local city, has opted in for marijuana. It happens that my daughter's city, which is about 90,000 people, has opted out. The next 5 cities have opted out. Colorado Springs is in, and some of the other cities, but even neighborhoods in Denver have opted out. So it's not all Colorado that has opted in on it. My concern with this city right now is, I agree with you, Mr. Pelozzola, trying to keep up with all the changes that are going on in Lansing is almost impossible. And until the legislature agrees with all the things that the governor wants, et cetera, I don't think we're gonna have any of that agreement until probably late December. They're pushing for June, but I think it's gonna be December. And I'm very cautious with our city moving ahead and making rules and ordinances that then have to be backtracked on. So I'm concerned. But I will entertain a motion for adjournment. I wanna thank everybody that came. I wanna thank all of you for participating. And I know your heart's in the right place and you've got a business mind and we like business, so you just have to wait and see what's going to happen. Thank you all for being here. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Support.
Moving support, please call the roll.
Yes.
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 Yes. Mr. Broll.
Mr. Palazzo. Palazzolo.
Yes.
Mr. Lalonde.
Yes.
Mr. Jakubiec.
Yes.
Mr. DeHaan.
Yes.
Mr. Burl, yes. Mr. Lubeck.
Yes.
Meeting's adjourned at 9 o'clock. Thank you all for coming.